Run, party, repeat. Welcome to the East Coast Adventures Dirt and Vert Podcast, where we talk all things running, racing, and training to help you get ready for your next big adventure.
Learn from our successes and our failures, and have fun at the same time. Join us right here every week with inspiring guests who share their captivating tales from the trails. And remember, nobody cares.
Run faster. All right. Welcome back to the Dirt and Vert Podcast. I'm David.
And I'm Matt.
And we have Coree Woltering with us today. Coree's actually an ultra runner that's been running for almost, I guess you said 11 years now, Coree. So just looking through his ultra sign up, it's almost jaw dropping to see all of the races he has. Looks like over 100 just on ultra sign up. And I know that's not all of the races Coree's ran, because I know I've seen him at Chattanooga Marathon and other events. So there's no telling what that number is. Coree may know it off the top of his head. But Coree, if you don't care, tell us a little about who you are and how you got into running.
Yeah. Hey, guys. Thanks for having me. Ultra sign up is absolutely wild because I guess I have been running ultras for 11 years now. But even before ultras, I was doing marathons, triathlons, but I come from a track and field background. So I started running back, junior high, the 200, the 400, the 800, absolutely loved all of that stuff. And was also a soccer player, a swimmer. Running was always kind of that thing that you had to do to stay in shape for other sports. And I don't think I ever realized that running would finally become my primary sport. So ran through high school, was going to run in college, but ended up getting 2 concussions my senior year, which I then ran track and field and cross country for the college I was going to play soccer for, and ended up being good enough at it that I just ended up running through the rest of my college career. Coming from the 400, the 800, I always said I would never run a marathon, had no interest in doing any of the longer stuff. And, I had some injuries in there. So you have a swim background, run background, a couple injuries. And finally, it's like, well, hey, maybe I should buy a bike. So I bought a bike and somehow, exactly, what college kid doesn't, it's like, instead of partying, let's go out and buy a bike. Well, there's plenty of partying too. So got a bike and started doing triathlon stuff, and actually qualified for the half Ironman World Championships in my first attempt at the Ironman. So here I am in college, a junior in college, and it's like, well, I've now qualified for the half Ironman World Championships, and yet I'm running the 8K for cross country in the fall, and I'm running the 800 on the track in the spring. So it was one of those where it's like, I had no idea what I really wanted to do. And just, it's like, I had this range, but I wasn't great at anything, but I was good enough at a lot of things that it just kind of got me through. So raced the half Ironman World Championships the first time, then ended up racing a second year, my final year of college. And so after college, I'm like, okay, I'm going to move from Illinois to Boulder, Colorado to become a professional triathlete, because what kid doesn't dream of doing that? So I move out to Boulder, and within literally the first 3 weeks of being in Boulder, I had started hanging out with mountain bikers and trail runners and pretty much gave up on the triathlon dream. It was like, I want to do trail running. And so that was 11 years ago at this point. And it's really funny because I wanted to be good at it, and all these people are like, oh, you may not go pro your first year, but you'll probably go pro at this. So they're like, don't give up the pro dream. And people actually can go pro in trail running. That's a sport. And I had no idea. And so I ran my first 50K, which was Malibu Canyon 50K, back in November of 2014. And had no idea what I was doing, had no idea about just how to pace this thing. It was a course of 7,500 feet of gain for the 50K. And I didn't know if that was a lot or a little bit, but was living in Colorado, went out to California for this thing, and ended up finishing third. And that's when I realized that trail running is what I wanted to do. So here we are 10 years later and have done some absolutely wild things.
That's a really cool story overall, Corey.
Yeah.
So your primary sport though was like soccer. You were going to college on a soccer scholarship?
I just wanted to play in college, and so I mean I was going on an academic scholarship, but yes, soccer was the sport that I wanted to play.
Okay. So how did the concussions happen, by the way?
Well, both of them were just collisions with other players that were probably intentional on their part, which I don't blame them because I was a pretty nasty soccer player. I was fairly small, but I deserved every single injury that I got in high school from playing soccer because I was a very aggressive soccer player.
Now, some of that probably transfers pretty well into running. You got to be a little aggressive to be out there pushing the pace.
Totally.
Probably
I mean, as an 800 meter, and as an 800 meter run around the track, the 800 is probably the most physical event on the track, I'd say, because it's almost a sprint for 2 full laps. Especially, indoor track, when you're on a 200 meter track, you're just fighting for that inner lane and all that. Track and field shouldn't be a contact sport, but I mean, there is some contact in it.
Yep. Yeah, there is. So your very first ultra, which is a 50K, with 7,000 feet of elevation gain, you run it in 4.5 hours and really have no idea what to expect.
Yeah. So
what was your longest distance up to that point?
My longest distance up to that point, I had run a marathon, but my first marathon was in September of that year. And so I did the Half Ironman World Championships for the second time in early September of 2014. And that was when I said, okay, I'm going to run my first marathon. So I ran the Quad Cities Marathon 2.5 or 3 weeks later. And I ran 2:37 for my first marathon. And my longest run before that was 17 miles, I think, was the longest I had gone before that. So 17-mile long run, ran a 2:37 marathon, and then 6 weeks later, I do this 50K. Yeah, it was all a very wild and just kind of messy transition, but very fun.
Awesome. Yeah. I mean, that is really awesome. And did you have any type of so going from 17 miles to a marathon to a 50K doesn't sound like a lot, but that is, especially when you're trying to push the pace and run hard. Did you have any failures of oh, I learned something as far as nutrition or fueling or chafing? Was there any new things that popped up that you were oh, never experienced this before?
Oh, yeah. So the marathon went pretty much flawless. Shockingly, the marathon was absolutely amazing. I came through 20 miles right at 2 hours and 4 seconds or something, and then ended up running, 2:37:17 or whatever. So it's 6-minute pace or 6:01 pace. Just super consistent, super even. Nothing really went wrong in the marathon. So I'm like, oh, this is really fun. Then we get to this 50K, and I signed up for this 50K because on Instagram, somebody saw that I had run my first marathon, and they commented, they're like, oh, that's a good time, but you should run a 50K. I don't know if your baby legs can handle it. So what do? Like any normal person, I'm like, oh yeah, what 50K should I run? And so this dude says, come do Malibu Canyon. So I go out to California to do this thing. And at the time, we had a bet that whoever lost the race would have to buy beer and tacos for the rest of the weekend. So, he's done multiple ultras. This is my first, and it's this competition of not just finishing, but now I don't want to have to buy beer and tacos for the rest of the weekend. So we go. I come through the first loop of this. It's a 2-loop course, and so I come through the first loop in, I think, an hour and 54 minutes or something. Way faster than I should have been. And it's oh, I finished the first loop, and oh, I still have to go out on a second loop of this. So I just remember going up the like major climb that kind of starts out that loop. And at that point, I don't think I've had enough calories today. Don't think I've had enough fluids today. And it was kind of a dry heat. And so everything that I'd been wearing before was just not working like it normally would. So it starts with a little bit of chafing under the armpits. And then it's like the inner thigh chafing. And it's like, oh, this really burns, but I'm also really dry and really salty, sweaty. So now all that's getting in there and it really starts to hurt. And I remember getting to the top of the climb and everyone's like, oh, like you look really hot. Like you need to put some water on yourself. So they're like putting water on me in the aid station. And then everything is now on fire because it's burning because everything is so chafed. But it's like, it's cooling me down, but it's also like lighting me up because it hurts so bad. And so I just remember with like 7 miles to go, it's like, all right, it's mostly downhill. It's mostly downhill. At this point, I'm in third, but I'm still ahead of the dude that I need to beat. So I don't have to buy tacos and beer. And so it's like, all right, we're good. We're good. And then you come off the final climb and then you have a mile to go and it's just flat to the finish. And I'm probably 3/4 of a mile out and I see him just like running down the hill as I am not running at this point. Both of my legs have just locked up because they're cramping so bad that I'm trying to like straight leg hobble down the trail to get to the finish as I keep looking over my shoulder. I'm like, okay, he's not gaining on me that much, but I'm not moving that fast. So it looked like a scene of The Walking Dead. I mean, I looked absolutely like a zombie in The Walking Dead just trying to make it down this trail. But I did beat him by like I think a minute. And so I was off the hook for having to buy anything for the rest of the weekend. But I learned about cramping, chafing, all of the things in this event.
And how water affects chafing.
I think we just talked about that. Like
you are right. I can only imagine how refreshing the water was because you were hot, but lighting you up. That had to be terrible. And run 7 more miles, that water's only going to make it worse.
Yep.
Oh.
Yep.
Sitting there like, this is nice, huh? And all of a sudden you're like, bam! Yeah.
What a visual.
I can see it.
The walk of shame for how long did you have to walk? Like a mile or two? Or
I only had 3/4 of a mile to go, but man, it was just like it seemed like the longest 3/4 of a mile of my life.
That's actually pretty awesome though, Corey, for your very first PK. That was really good pacing though. To be honest, like you made it all the way to the end running that hard of a pace. So that's actually kind of a win because some people go out way too fast and end up walking the last 5 miles. So for your first try, that was pretty damn good pacing overall, really, to think about it that way.
Yeah, I walked the last 17 of my first 50K. So
kudos, man. That's awesome. I hope that the first thing you said when you woke up the next day was, I want tacos for breakfast.
Yeah.
And lunch.
Yep.
And dinner.
Tacos all weekend.
Absolutely. Like 100%. That is, yes.
So how did you end up with a PK in California? Just like, I know you said you picked one in Malibu, but was it because you kind of wanted to go to California or was there a specific race that you were like, this is it?
Nope, that's where Anthony lived. So I mean, that was the race that I had to go to. So he even got to pick the race. So I mean, he thought he would win.
Before?
Yeah, he had done it before, trained in that park. So like he thought he would win this thing. I was like, oh no, way too competitive for that.
Well, that's pretty awesome though. I mean, what a way to go out.
Yeah.
So at that point, were you hooked? Like this was it? Like you just knew you were going to stick with ultras?
Oh yeah, I was absolutely hooked at that point. And it was funny though, because in any of the marathons that I had run up to that point, I mean, I guess I'd only run one marathon at that point, but the marathon it went well enough that it was like, oh, the marathon's really kind of fun. And I had success at the half Ironman distance without it being other than like one of the half Ironman races I'd done, one of like the 13. One of them was terrible. The other 12 were fine. And so because of that, this 50K was the first time that I felt like I really kind of suffered for an extended period of time.
Man, how humbling
I think that's
is
what
that?
hooked me.
Yeah. It's like
It
you feel
was.
like
It
you're
was.
doing something really good, like your marathon, a 2:37. Like you're like, yes, damn it, I'm dialed in. And then you go and you killed this 50K, but at the same time, the 50K also killed you. It humbled you. That last mile was like, okay, there's something here.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's what was really exciting to me, because having success at a lot of other things that I had done previously and just having success kind of early on at them was, a blessing and a curse, I guess. And so, yes, this 50K still went well, but it was like, wow, there's a lot that I need to improve on.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'm sure that you went out and started researching chafing and lube and electrolytes at that point.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Yep, absolutely. It was like, oh, wow, there's a lot of other things I need to learn.
Did you, and this was like a humbling experience for me too, with my first like really hard race where I was actually trying to run. The cramps, it's just like the last few miles, the cramps killed me, and I knew nothing about electrolytes. Obviously I'm drinking just whatever's at the aid station and water, because that's what we do. And then, when you get humbled, you want to learn, you want to get better. What did that do for you as far as electrolytes? Like, what did you figure out, and what did you try to do going forward?
Yeah, so the good news is all the people I was hanging out with in Colorado, they're all ultra runners, trail runners and stuff. So when I got back to Colorado, I was like, hey, like, everyone's like, how did the race go? And so I told them, and they were like, oh, well, of course, because you need to do this, you need to do that, blah, 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 blah. And so thankfully I had a very solid group of people around me that I could learn from, and I didn't necessarily always have to learn things the hard way, which, before California, I'm fairly certain they had told me many of these things, and I'm like, oh no, I'll figure it out. It'll be fine. So that was something I just had to learn the hard way. But thankfully, it's like I was able to fix a lot of these issues pretty quickly.
Yeah. If you've got that solid of a group around you, but it is funny to see some people when they run their first ultra, they like watch every YouTube video, read 14 books. They read like how to treat your feet and how to dial in nutrition. And then there's this other group of us that were like, okay, we're going to figure this shit out on the run.
Yep.
And sometimes that's the best way to learn, because you can go into a deep hole of trying to figure everything out. But at the end of the day, you can watch 14 videos and read 12 books, and it may not help you at all because you're different. We're all different. That kind of shoes, that kind of nutrition may not work for you. And it's just trial and error. So when you're scared or you're over planning, sometimes you're just overthinking it way too much. So I love the fact that you're just like, hell yeah, we're going to go to California. We're going to run this thing. I love it. So I see that you go back and you do the Leadville Marathon, but I guess a 50K wasn't enough, because it looks like you immediately go do the Silver Rush 50 miler. So at this point, I'm assuming that Coree has spent plenty of time looking some of this stuff up and talking to other runners. So did that 50 miler, how did that turn out?
So, oh boy. So after I did Malibu Canyon 50K, I wanted to sign up for a 50 mile, and I wanted to find one for March, and around March 7th, because that's when my birthday is. And so I figured that'd be a good excuse to leave Colorado and go to somewhere warm for March and do a 50 mile. But what I didn't realize is I actually had mono when I raced this first PK. And so I get back to Colorado, and I'm just absolutely wrecked. And I'm still out here like searching for 50 miles to do in March, but not realizing I have mono yet. So I'm sick for a solid week to 10 days or so. So I finally go to the doctor, and they're like, oh, you have mono. That makes sense. This makes sense why I feel so bad. Because I'm like, I shouldn't be feeling this bad for this long. So anyway, this kind of just was a very long recovery after this 50K to finally feeling normal again. So instead of doing a 50 mile in March like I had planned, I signed up for Silver Rush because I moved to Leadville. So I moved to Leadville from Boulder in December of 2014. And so here I am still recovering from mono, now living at 10,000 feet, like completely delaying any sort of recovery, making all sorts of terrible decisions for my health, but yet living the dream by living in Leadville. So I'm up there, and that's how I signed up for the Leadville Trail Marathon and then Silver Rush 50. Living up there, I thought that I'd just go crush the trail marathon. But I had spent like 3 weeks at sea level before the trail marathon because I went back to Illinois and ended up running like my track 5K PR. And then went back up and I'm like, oh, 5K PR on the track. Now I can go run this trail marathon. It's going to go great. And that was my first experience of living at altitude, but then going back down for an extended period of time and then coming back up and trying to race. And that trail marathon was absolutely terrible. Just hated it. Just didn't want anything to do with it. And it felt worse than the 50K felt. So instead of just like sitting around and feeling sorry for myself, I signed up for Silver Rush, which is a few weeks later. And I go and I'm running in the top like 2 to 3 for most of the race. And then I took a pretty hard fall at like mile 48, split my knee open, and 40 at mile 42, split my knee open. And it's like, okay, you just have 8 miles to go. Like, it's going to be totally fine. So I just get up, keep going. I get past at mile 47. So now I'm in fourth at mile 47. And you're basically just still going downhill. And then you just have one decently nasty climb up and then a descent to the finish. And it's like, okay, I can get him. I'm like, I'm a track dude. It's fine. It's okay. And with a mile to go, I just see the other dude at the top of the final hill, and I realize I'm going to finish fourth. It's like, okay, well, I finished fourth by 52 seconds, and that was my first attempt at 50 miles, and I was just like, I think I should just give up trail running. She's like, I'm absolutely terrible at this. I had a horrible Leadville Trail Marathon, and now I finished fourth at Silver Rush and missed the podium by 52 seconds. I should just stop. And everyone's like, they're like, you still got an auto spot to Leadville 100 if you choose to take it. And I'm like, oh no, like I'm absolutely done with this. Like I just terrible. And everyone's like, oh no, Corey. They're like, at that time, I think the time I ran was still one of maybe in like the top 10 fastest times that had been run at Silver Rush. But in my head, it's just like, oh no, I finished fourth that day, so it was terrible. So it took a little bit of convincing to get me to focus on trails a bit more, but it was really funny because honestly, like at Silver Rush, everything felt great until I took that fall at like mile 42. And then it was, things kind of really hurt now. And I think everything just started to hurt at once. And so that was the longest time I had ever been on my feet. That was the longest time I had ever been moving. That was just the longest everything.
So how long did it take you to recover from mono? Because that's usually like months and months.
It took me months.
I'm surprised you were like even training during that time.
Yeah, so mono was honestly a solid probably 3 months to feel good. And so that's why I didn't run a 50 miler in March, because at that point it's like I was going out for these 1 hour runs and I'm like, oh, that was a good run, I guess. And so that was the hardest thing. And it's just looking back on that, coming from a track and field triathlon background, everything being so intense and just go, go, go. I think that my mindset was just everything always has to be go, 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 when I probably should have given myself a little bit more time to recover. And I mean, I had a coach back then, and my coach would ask how I'm feeling. And of course, I'd just say that I felt great because I didn't want to be the person that's like, oh, I don't feel good, which no, I definitely should have been the I don't feel good. But yeah, a solid 3 months, I would say, to recover from mono.
Well, and I would say that Malibu Canyon probably weakened your immune system anyways, if you ran that hard.
Yeah.
For sure.
Probably set you up for failure to begin with. But man, you killed Silver Rush, though. I can't believe you were like, being dramatic about, oh, I'm terrible, it's awful, I'm not gonna.
It's like, oh no, I finished fourth.
That's a killer time. It looks like minutes. You went and got some revenge on your next 50 because you do Tunnel Hill and win it at the 50 miler. So
yeah,
you needed a little redemption, didn't you?
So oddly enough, I was actually signed up for the Indianapolis Marathon. And so at this point, I'm like, okay, I'm going to go back. I'm like, me being dramatic. I said, I'm done with the trail race. I'm not going to do 50 miles. I'm just going to focus on the marathon for now. So I signed up for Indianapolis and wanted to do it, and to show how serious I was about, not racing long trail stuff anymore. I moved from Leadville down to Denver, and then was just super unhappy in Denver, so moved out to Vegas so I could be back at sea level but still have mountains and not have to deal with winter. So I'm like, this is going to be perfect for training for Indianapolis. And then it's like the week before Indianapolis, and I just chose not to get on the flight and go race it because I wasn't excited about it at all. And so then I'm emailing Steve Durbin. I'm like, hey, I know that you don't know me and I don't know you, and Tunnel Hill seems to be sold out, but I'd love to come to Tunnel Hill and run it because I was training for a marathon. I just don't want to do it. And he's like, sure, okay, whatever. I flew back to Illinois to run Tunnel Hill and had a great experience. So
that's awesome.
I was like, well,
you got to love a race director that will just not ask you a ton of questions. Yeah. Be like, I got you.
Yeah, he's just like, okay, cool, whatever. He's like, see you in a couple weeks. Like, great, perfect. And so, yeah, it went well. And that was also kind of a learning experience because instead of it being like a mountainous 50, it was flat. And so I, once again, had never run that far where you are just running the whole time. Like, there isn't any hiking at Tunnel Hill. There's no power hiking up a mountain. It's just you're running. And so it was different. It was like running a marathon, just slower and much longer.
Well, and I'm sure that was like a good redemption run for you because after Silver Rush, you're like, no, I'm done. But then you come out and you blister this race and you beat second place by like 4 minutes. And, that doesn't seem like a lot, but that's a lot in a run.
A lot, yeah.
Especially a 50-mile race that's fast and flat. I shouldn't say flat. It's not really that flat, but it's fast. But man, did that change your perspective a little bit on your ability and ultra running and what you thought after Silver Rush?
It did, because I think I realized that not every ultra has to be some, big mountain outing. Not everything has to be super big vert. And there's anything from really technical to just you don't even need a headlamp at night type of running, And so it was nice to have all of those experiences of different races that were all just completely different and kind of allow me to decide what I liked and what I didn't like doing.
Yeah. That's actually a great perspective because there's so many ultras to choose from anymore. There's so many and so many different types of formats that, you shouldn't get caught up on just one thing. Like you may not be really good at mountain running, but you may be really good at backyards, backyard ultras, or you might be really good at rails to trails. I mean, there's all kinds of different events now. Yeah. So, when you first got into ultra running, there were not a lot to choose from. So there was, you had to travel more, but now, I mean, every weekend you can find 4 or 5 ultras in your backyard, within an hour or two drive, which is pretty awesome. So I think that's really a really good point, especially for people listening that haven't really had a good race so far per se. If they've only done a few new ultras, like keep playing around and try different events and find what you're good at, because everybody's better. Some people are really good at climbing. Some people are really good at just fast and flat stuff. But I mean, that's definitely awesome. And pretty early on in your career too. Yeah. I mean, to do that and win Tunnel Hill. Tunnel Hill's a big race. It's usually very competitive. And I'm sure Steve Durbin at that point was like, I'm glad I let you in.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
So did you, when did you finally do, I went too far back. When did you first do your first 100? I was trying to look that up here.
First 100 was 2017.
Oh, I see it. Dunes.
Yep. Good old Dunes 100 down in Florida.
I know nothing about that one. What is that? Is it trail?
If you want to call it that. So the Dunes 100 is a 4-loop 100-mile course. I don't think the 100 mile actually doesn't exist anymore. Now it's a 50K and a half marathon. But the 100 mile is a 25-mile loop that you did 4 times, and it's all on sugar sand and sand dunes down in Florida. And yeah, and for me at that point, I was coaching some athletes that were all signed up for 100-mile races, and so I had never done 100 before, so I just felt like I should do 100 just to know what they might be going through. So I signed up for this thing, and Florida in February. I mean, it was also a great excuse to get out of Illinois at that time and go down to Florida and run because it's warm and there's a beach. And so, I mean, that's all you really need to say to convince me to go do something. So I signed up for this thing and it was miserable. It was absolutely miserable. It was 87, heat index of 104 during the day. They were going through like a record heat wave for February. I mean, this is early February, like February 7th or something. And so they're going through this record heat wave. I was coming down from Illinois. When I left Illinois, it was literally single digits in Illinois as I get down to Florida. And so with the heat index, it's 100 degrees warmer than what I had been training in. And just, I went out hard for that first loop, and I figured I could just get as much ground covered as possible, and it was still decently cool. The second loop, I'm still in first place through mile 50, but now we're hitting mid-afternoon, and the heat is just absolutely baking me. And my first loop was like 4 hours and 15 minutes or something like that. Then my second loop was still, I think it's like 4:45 or something. Then loop 3 comes around, and I think I'm going to say like 7 hours for loop 3. And it just went from, oh, I'm having the time of my life and I'm loving Florida to, I never want to run again. I don't want to be here. Somebody take me off of this course. Please just let me go home. I'm never going to run 100 again. And I remember getting to the mile 75 aid station, and I just sat there and I'm like, I cannot go back out in this. And the aid station volunteers are wonderful. They have like fresh coconuts that they're just cutting into. They're like, here's some coconut water. Here's a beer if you want one. Here's electrolytes. Here's ramen. Here's potatoes. I'm just like, I can't stomach anything. I don't want any food. I just want to be done. And then my pacer shows up. And my pacer shows up with a mini disco ball and a strobe light and a little speaker in a backpack. And they're just super energetic and excited to be out there at 1 a.m. as I am contemplating every wrong decision I've made in my life at this point that has led me to sitting in this chair at mile 75. and I sit there a little bit longer. And then finally, it's like, well, this last loop isn't going to run itself, so we should probably just get up and go. And at that point, I leave mile 75, and I'm in, I think, 8th at this point. So, like, still kind of up there, but, not in the first or second that I was for a while. And then I end up running, I think, 4:15 for the final loop and get back to third, and just had an amazing last loop after sitting down forever. And that was when I learned that 100 milers are very unpredictable and anything can happen.
Yeah. Well said. Well said. I don't know anybody that ever ran their first ultra that doesn't say, F this, I'm never running again.
Yep. It's just like, this is terrible. I think the thing that got me was the fact that people choose to sign up for these things, because the athletes I was coaching, like, they're not getting paid to do this. They're just going out and doing these because it's fun. And I was just like, what is fun about this? There's nothing really that fun about it. And then afterward, you feel terrible. And there's nothing fun about the recovery process of it. And as someone that likes to get up and run, it's like, oh, now I can't even run for like a week after because my feet were so messed up and everything just hurt. And so I'm like, what is fun about this? But
Yeah.
now I know.
I thought that a lot.
I believe that's most of the population's first experience with 100 miles.
Like when I get done with these things, I get home when I can't, like you said, I can't walk, I can't run. I'm laying around, and my wife will go, "You do this stupid stuff to yourself." I'm like, I sure do. And people at work go, "You pay to go run these?" I'm like, yeah, and you don't want to know how much they cost either. Because in the next week at work, you just can't even walk, and they're like, "You do this? Why? Why are you doing this?" I'm like, because it's fun, I guess.
How did your feet hold up in the sand?
They didn't hold up well. I will say that. So, like, both of my feet were blistered. I didn't know anything about, like, gaiters at that time, so I wasn't wearing any. And just being out in the sand, it sucked. But then, like, the sand gets so hot during the day. And at that time, I was wearing, like, a decently minimal shoe because I figured, less weight on my feet would be better, and it's sandy, and I thought I'd have better grip and stuff, and just a horrible decision. And so, like, I felt like my feet were just on fire all day, and then just having the sand in my shoes and socks, and just, they did not hold up well. So when I finally took my shoes off at the end, like, both feet were just, like, covered in blisters, hot spots, and it was pretty ugly.
I can just see you sitting in that chair at mile 75, like, all doom and gloom.
Yeah.
Life sucks. Your pacer's over there with a disco ball and a karaoke machine.
Like, ready to go? Let's go.
Corey,
Yep.
what are you doing?
So excited. Exactly. And that's how it was. He was so excited about it. I'm just like, I don't want to be here. He's like, you can go home. He's like, oh, no, you still have one more loop to run. It's like, well, okay.
So did you run that last loop that fast because you were done, or because you actually started feeling better?
I think I just wanted to be done. But then, honestly, like, maybe mile 85 or so, things kind of started to turn around and actually started feeling decent, and then was running really well. And it's like, oh, this isn't terrible. I mean, I don't think I ever want to do it again, but it's not terrible. And now I guess I've done it many more times. Well, not that race, but
we were, I think it was Mary and I were crewing someone. No, we weren't crewing. We just went to go help, but there was a 100-miler at the end of the year. The question was like, how do I help this person finish? What do I do? And the only thing I said was, this is their first 100. So somewhere between mile 70 and 80 is a whole different world that they've never experienced. Mm-hmm. And when they hit that, you have to help them finish. At some point, it will come back. But you're going to spend an hour or two of everything is wrong. They're going to die. They're never going to run again. So just be prepared. And it's, that's what's so funny about a 100-mile race. Somewhere between 70 to 85, that's a whole new experience. Like, there's just one moment in there for everybody. It's like, very rarely, every now and then I hear someone be like, oh, it was perfect. But 99% of the people I talk to, they're like, yeah, it sucked. Like, there was just this one moment, like, I was just ready to quit. I didn't care. I was going to give up. There's something about a 100-mile race that you don't really experience that in any other race until you do a 100-mile race. And then you're just like, there's that one moment where, like, you're contemplating what the hell you're even thinking.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Honestly, for me, that moment comes way earlier in most races. Like, for me, it's normally between like mile 45 to 55 is when it's just like, oh, this is terrible. I don't want to be here. And then it's like, once you get over mile 55, it's like, we're over halfway now.
Over halfway now.
Yeah, you try not to count the miles, but it's hard not to. It really is. You're like, damn, how many more I got left?
Yeah, you look down at your watch, like, I still got 40 more miles of this crap. And then, 20 miles later, you're like, oh, good again. Let's go finish this thing.
But, it didn't take Corey too long before he does his next 100-miler. So
He's
Yep.
probably looking them up as soon as he got done. Woke up the next morning like, what's the next one?
Yeah. So it looks like Western States, right?
Yep.
Or did I say
2018.
Yes.
Oh no, Western States 2018.
Well,
Yeah, I got in with one
before we
ticket.
talk about Western States, I have to ask you this. How long was it before you started looking at races again when you finished that 100 mile?
Honestly, less than a day.
Yep, that's normal.
That's how it works.
Yeah. They weren't hundreds though. It was like, I'm gonna go back to that 50K, 50 mile. It wasn't hundreds I was looking at, but then I think I did actually sign up for Gorge K and ended up dropping that year. But yeah, I was like, 100K wasn't super terrible, but 100 miles, I don't know.
So how did Western States come about?
Yeah, so I got into Western States in 2018 with one ticket in the lottery.
Wow.
And yeah, first time putting in and got in and was like, well, I guess I have to do this thing. Which is funny because I had no desire to do any hundreds that soon. And it was a very interesting experience because I was running for Innovate at the time. And because Innovate was trying to make a big push and, bring back their US team. Um, I got it. So I did, what did I do? Yeah, so I did in 2017. I did Sean O'Brien 100K as my first 100K, hoping to try to get a golden ticket in, and just had a terrible experience at the 100K the first time, and was just like, I don't love this. And so, but it was a golden ticket race back then, so I'm like, oh, okay, I'll do it. And then in 2018, I got into Western through the lottery. So it's like, well, I guess we're going. And didn't really have any expectations for it. And then having a pretty decent training block and thought, okay, maybe we'll have a little bit of expectations for this thing. Ended up getting super sick like a month out from the race, was on antibiotics and all kinds of craziness. And so still went to the race and was like, I'm just here to have fun. We'll see what happens. And ended up running like 1930 or somewhere in there. And honestly, just enjoyed every moment of it. I had a super fun experience. Just really, I took too much time in aid stations, enjoying the aid stations and talking and chatting with people. But like, honestly, it's still one of my favorite experiences at a longer event, just because like, yeah, things kind of hurt, but nothing really hurt that bad. And sure, it was 105 or whatever at the river crossing, but it didn't feel like it was 105. And so, like, it was just a very enjoyable day for me. And, I wasn't in the top 10 and wasn't necessarily concerned about that. Just got to go and enjoy my first experience at Western. So you can't be mad about that.
And it's really good to not treat every race like a race.
Yeah.
It's sometimes you take the joy out of it when you do that. So that's probably why that's still your favorite race. You didn't put any pressure on yourself.
Yeah. And so like, it was really fun. And I still ran well, but it was just fun. And so I don't know. It was one of those where I didn't really think that I'd get into Western States with one ticket. So I was putting my name in the lottery because that's what you're supposed to do. And honestly, I was just trying to keep sponsors happy at that point. So I'm like, yeah, I'll put my name in, whatever, and not thinking I'll ever get in. And then, it's like, oh, I got in. I have to go do this thing now.
Well, and kudos to you too, because like, yeah, you didn't take it super serious. You still raced it, I'm sure, but you enjoyed it, and you still finished in the top 25 out of 300 people in Western States. Yeah. That's pretty impressive in itself that you had fun. You got to spend a little time in the aid stations, and you still performed really well. So, great job, Corey. That's pretty awesome, man. And that's a pretty big nostalgic race to do that too. So I understand completely of like wanting to enjoy that experience more than race that experience and possibly make it something that you don't enjoy and you don't even want to remember, like sitting in a chair at mile 75, like, why did I do this?
Yeah. Totally. Yeah, it was really funny, like, looking at Strava afterwards or whatever, because there was my moving time and my overall time are quite a bit different. So I'm like, I guess I probably could have been a little more efficient in those aid stations, but what fun would that have been?
Well, you've done so many events, obviously can't cover all of them, but what has been your most memorable race that you've done and why?
Oh boy, most memorable. There are so many, but one of my favorites, I'd probably say is Ultra Trail Mount Fuji, just because getting to go to Japan was absolutely incredible, and I was very well taken care of in Japan. So, like, all the logistics were set up for me and everything was amazing. But the race itself is you can make it as competitive as you want to make it, but at the same time, it's very much a cultural experience, I would say, because the aid stations there are run by people from the local villages that you're running through. So
Well, how
they're
cool.
actually, yeah, so they're actually out there cooking food for you. Like, one of them was doing rice, one of them was doing noodles, one aid station had sushi, like, just really cool local authentic food. They have these buns, like these bread buns that are filled with, some of them are filled with cream, some of them are filled with meat. Those are amazing. And so, like, I wanted to go there and be competitive. I also realized pretty early on that I wasn't going to be competitive. And so I just took my time to soak it all in and just eat everything in the aid stations and enjoy it. And at night, you get to run by one of, like, the bigger temples there, and it's all lit up. And it's really cool. And then there's also a section that you're on sacred ground. So you have to wash your shoes before you can run through the section of trail, and just, like, really, really neat experiences like that. So, like, yes, it is a fun race to go be competitive at. It's a very fast but hard race as well. But at the same time, like, if you want an actual experience, it would be a great one for that. And the other reason it's memorable is because I was at mile 90 when there's a huge blizzard that was coming through just this whole weekend, basically. But I was at mile 90 when they finally canceled the race because it was truly whiteout conditions as we were climbing up this mountain. And so I'm in the aid station at mile 90, and I had been trying to get warm a little bit because the gear list that you need for this race is like 18 or 20 items. And I'm just like, why would we ever need any of these things? It's like you have to have your rain layer, but a second rain layer, and like a base layer and a second base layer and all this stuff. I'm just like, we'd never ever need this. Well, sure enough, there was just this storm that was coming through, and I think I used every single item in my pack at some point, trying to switch out wet layers and dry layers and stay warm. I'm in the aid station, and I'd been there for probably just a little bit too long, but I'm like, there's some fire here, it's warm, and I'm like, I'm not going to win this thing. I'm just going to get warm, and then I'm going to keep moving. And, like, I hear everyone's phones buzzing at once. And so we look, and I get this text message in Japanese, and I don't read Japanese, but here you go. And I'm looking at it, and people don't seem happy about this text. So finally I asked somebody what's going on, and they're like, oh, the race is canceled. I'm like, what do you mean the race is canceled? Well, because of this blizzard, the race is canceled. Unless you're at aid station 9, then you can continue to the finish. I'm like, oh, we're at 9. They're like, oh, no, we're at 8. I'm like, right, we are at 8. So what does that mean? They're like, just stay put. Like, okay, well, we were literally standing on top of a mountain under, like, one of those little pop-up tents, and we're just supposed to stay put as this blizzard's happening. I'm like, I could continue on down the trail and actually get down off of this mountain. They're like, oh no, everyone has to stay. Well, no one was prepared for this, so the next thing you know, it's like every single runner that's still out there that's between 7 and 8 has to come up to 8 and then just wait. And so before you know it, there's like 300 of us under these little tents, and, like, people are just packed in there. Some people are just still out in the snow, and it's like, well, what are we supposed to do? And you just wait out the storm. And then you had to walk 10K down this paved road so that you could get on a bus to then go 10K to the finish. So it would have actually been quicker to go back out into the storm, get to aid station 9, and then continue down the mountain to the finish. But that's just, that's how it is sometimes. And so it was really funny to me, though, because up on the mountain, it's the storm, it's all the snow. And because they can't get the buses up to the aid station, that's why we had to walk down this road. But we get down the road and it's still kind of snowing where the buses are, but you get on the bus and you go around this lake. I mean, it's like 50 degrees and sunny at the finish. And it's like,
Man.
So it's like, okay, I mean, it is what it is, but it was absolutely wild. So one of my most favorite experiences, definitely one of the most memorable. And I would say everybody should do that race because it is absolutely incredible, even if the weather can be terrible.
That's all. So is it a 100-mile race?
Yep, they have 100, and then they also, I think it's more like 108, or maybe 100, 107, 108. But then they also have, I think, a CK. So something that still gets to do all the fun stuff without being absolute torture.
I think the cultural aspect's pretty cool. The sacred part where you have to wash your shoes. Yeah. That stuff's really interesting. Like, that is so cool to see the different countries and even the aid station food that's offered, because it's so much different. That's just really cool to experience. Was there anything at an aid station you were like, not eating that?
I don't think so, but I think I got everything that I just looked for the things that I wanted.
There you go. Yeah, I mean, when you're running 100 miles, you pretty much decide on what you want to eat. So that's a good point. Yeah, they probably had a good there.
Yeah. Oh, and there's a 7-Eleven on this course. There's one stretch mid-race. Yes, there's one stretch mid-race where I think you have like 15 or 16 miles or something between aid stations, and it's a little bit of trail, but it's quite a bit of pavement. And so there's a 7-Eleven on the course, and everyone's like, make sure you bring cash or bring a card with you so that you can stop at the 7-Eleven and get something. And that's what they told me before. And I'm like, why would I ever stop at a 7-Eleven mid-race? I'm like, there are aid stations. And they're like, oh, no. Once you leave this last aid station, you don't want to fill up your pack all the way. They're like, just, fill it halfway, but then stop at 7-Eleven, get like a Coca-Cola or a coffee, and then keep going. And it was just funny because I'm like, I've never heard of anyone doing this. And sure, like the people that are winning the race, they're not stopping at 7-Eleven. But the rest of us that are, farther back, it's like, oh no, you do stop at that 7-Eleven at 3 a.m. and you get yourself a coffee.
That's got to be the coolest thing ever, to build a 7-Eleven into an aid station. Like,
yep. It's like, yep, go ahead and check that one in.
Was it similar to a 7-Eleven here in America?
I love 7-Eleven in Japan. I will say that. I absolutely love it because it's similar to like a 7-Eleven here, except they have so many more things and it's better. And so because of that, it's like you can walk in there. Like I love rice when I'm running. Like rice is great, easy fuel, easy on the stomach. They have these little rice triangles there. It could just be regular rice. It could be rice with chicken in it. It could be rice with salmon in it. It could be rice with whatever. You can take those things, eat them on the go. So good. You can get just all kinds of good stuff. And then there's also like squid.
Oh yeah, I've tried squid. That's it's interesting texture.
Yes.
Man, someone needs to make a race where you just like you build a Buc-ee's into an aid station.
We can try it.
There you go.
I don't know. After I got done eating, I'm not sure I could run because those sandwiches they're pretty big.
Yeah. All right. So what? I think you've already answered this, but what is your worst race as far as like for you was a struggle or difficult? And if it's that 100-miler we were talking about, I totally get that. But I was just curious, like what has been one of your hardest races to finish? And it can be hard based on many things, but for you, like what was your hardest? It doesn't even have to be a 100-miler. It can be anything. Could have been that 50K where you walked in shame. So
yeah, I mean, there are 3 races that I can think of that have been just definitely really hard to finish. But the hardest for me was Ultra Trail Snowdonia over in Wales because I signed up for the 100K there. And I went into it hoping to be competitive, even though realistically that was not going to happen and just with everything else that was going on in life at that point, like it wasn't going to happen. But I don't think I realized like how bad I was going to run. And so this 100K race has 25,000 feet of elevation gain. So, and it's not even a full 100K. It's like 59 miles with 25,000 feet of gain. So it's absolutely wild. And the first 50K of it took me, I think I came through the first 50K in maybe like 10 and a half hours or something. It was like 50K, 13,000 feet of climbing, maybe 10 and a half hours. And at that point, I actually had hoped to be finishing the 100K in like 13 hours, and yet I'm 50K in and nowhere close to 13 hours. And so I just didn't want to be out there at night on that course and thought that I'd be able to do it, but I was nowhere close to that. So the final 50K of that race was just absolute misery for me because, I mean, I will start by saying I got to Wales and they were having like 62 for the high and 40 for the low and sunny every day. So it was just absolute perfect for the 5 days leading into this race. And then the 100-mile was supposed to start on Friday night at I think 6 p.m. or something. And they ended up canceling the 100-mile at 2 a.m. or something like that because just the conditions on Mount Snowdon were so bad and everywhere else that they had to cancel the 100-mile. But then the 100K started at 4 a.m. and they at least were able to get us started. But I mean, by us starting, it was 40 degrees and raining. And then it never really warmed up from that throughout the day. And then like overnight, there's a little bit of snow. So as you know, here I am at mile like 40, it's kind of snowing and it's raining. It's 40 mile per hour wind, like all the stuff that I don't love. And it's just like, all right, like, you have to keep moving. But I had gone through just all of my base layers, like everything was soaked. My rain, like I had already wet through my rain jacket, and like I was being super stubborn and didn't want to put on rain pants, which if I would have just put on rain pants, like to start with, it would have saved me hours in that race just from being warm and not being miserable, but didn't want to put them on. And I mean, I didn't even put my rain jacket on till like 50K into this race. And so I was just making all of the classic mistakes that it's one of those things where I knew better, but I just didn't want to take 30 seconds to actually fix the problem and just wanted to deal with it. And so this race took me way longer than it should have. And honestly, it was just hard to be out there for 24 hours to finish 100K. So
that is absolutely crazy to think about. 24 hours for 100K.
How much?
And it wasn't even 100K. You're talking 24 hours to run 60 miles.
Yeah. Right? How much elevation?
25,000 feet.
I mean, are you running or are you just hiking?
You hike up everything and you run down what you can. But at the same time, you're out there and like Wales, like they don't really believe in switchbacks, but they also don't believe in ropes or chains or anything like that. So like the trails that you're on for that race, like in the US, I don't think they'd even allow like half of that stuff to fly just because for safety stuff. But in Wales, they're just like, oh yeah, there's a marker here, and you know, it's just you follow this path, and then there's going to be another marker like a mile down. It's like, I'm not from here. I don't know this path. And like, sure, there might be a marker, but you're putting markers on like the side of rocks, and I'm just looking down so I don't trip and fall off the mountain. And like, am I going to see these markers? I don't know. It was absolutely wild. I mean, it was still, I'm very happy I finished that thing, but it was also one of just the most wild experiences of my life. And then being up on some of those ridges with it being so windy and rainy with a little bit of snow was just like, this is way above my pay grade.
So how many countries have you ran in, Corey? That's pretty awesome.
Oh boy. Honestly, I don't even know. Either probably 10 to 12 different countries that I've raced in, and a couple other countries I've been to just for like photo shoot, content shoots for sponsors and stuff. So probably 15 maybe.
Yeah, pretty awesome.
That's awesome.
Man, that's great. Yeah, it was funny. We had We had Ashley on here, Ashley Paulson, and she could not talk about the project that was coming up. That's all she would say. She said, we have an upcoming project. And then when it finally gets released, it's you and Ashley like in this show. And I'm like, oh, well, that's cool. Coree's on here too. I wanted to ask you why you were on here because Ashley didn't really get to talk about it. She was sworn to secrecy. But how did that come about for you, getting to be on the show? And how did you enjoy that experience?
Yeah, so the casting producer for that found me on Instagram, and it was funny because I had watched season 1, Race to Survive Alaska, and I knew a couple of the people that were on season 1. And so when the casting producer hit me up about season 2, I was just like, oh, I don't want to do Alaska. It's going to be wet and cold. And they said, oh, well, it won't be Alaska. They were like, think somewhere tropical. So it won't be super cold and it won't be wet. And I was like, well, if there's going to be snow, I'm still not interested. And they're like, oh yeah, there won't be snow. Well, that was all a lie. That was absolutely all a lie. So you go through the casting process of it and okay, cool. Pick your partner. I picked Jeff Watterson, and I mean, he's from Indiana, absolute, just awesome person. So, it's text Jeff one day and I'm like, hey, are you sitting down and like something to ask you? And he's like, oh, okay. And so I ask him, he's like, oh, you're going to pick me for this? And he's like, yeah, let's do this. I'm like, awesome. So picked a partner, go through all the stuff that you have to do. Great. And then you don't find out where you're going until like a week before you're actually going. And so you just like, all right, whatever they say. And so I'm over here just like, oh yeah, we're going somewhere tropical. It's not going to be snow, like all this stuff. And then you had to apply for a visa for New Zealand. And so when we applied, so that's when we figured out where we were going. So I started looking at the weather of just basically anywhere in New Zealand of where I thought this thing could be. And I'm like, they lied. Like, there is still snow on the ground in New Zealand. It is not that warm. And it's funny because at this time, it's like you still can't tell people what you're doing, where you're going. I mean, you can kind of tell your family a little bit, but you can't really tell anybody else anything. And so because of that, you have no idea who you're competing against until the start of this thing. And it's just like, oh, like it was actually really funny, like at the start, because it's like, oh, that's Ashley. Like, I know her. And other than that, didn't know anybody else that was there. But it was a wild experience. And what you see on TV, I mean, everything that you see on TV, like we had to do all of those things, and there's still so much more that doesn't even get shown on TV. And it's just there is still so much more that does not get shown, and just like how intense it was. Like, it looks intense on TV, but to actually be there in person, it is 1,000 times more intense.
Well, I'm sure that's an experience you'll probably never forget either. Would you have done it? Would you do it now if they asked you?
Yeah, you will never forget that experience for sure. And I would absolutely do it again, but I would just need some sort of confirmation that there won't be snow. Like, that's the thing. It's like, I mean, it's like I moved to Chattanooga to get away from snow, but now it's like, I guess I do live in Maine now, and it's it'd be a completely different experience because cold in Maine compared to cold in New Zealand is completely different. And so that would actually be fine. But at that time, I was not a fan of cold. I didn't want to deal with it. Just had thought we were going somewhere warm. And so in my mind, I'm like, oh yeah, this is going to be fun. This is going to be awesome. It's going to be warm. And it was not warm.
Yeah, I love how they just tell him, think somewhere tropical.
Is New Zealand tropical at all?
I mean, there's like forest that's green, but I wouldn't call it tropical. And sure, there's plenty of ocean and there's water, but it was not tropical.
Yeah, I'm sure that's not,
or at least the parts that we were in were not tropical.
When I think tropical, I don't think New Zealand at all.
No. I'm thinking 90 degrees in the ocean is what I'm thinking.
Yeah, somewhere south down there, yeah.
Totally.
So, Corey, before we jump into questions, I got a couple of things just to ask you. So obviously when you started running and you fell in love with trails and realized, you wanted to run those, and then you kind of set your path, I'm sure, on trying to be pick up a sponsor and, be pro. And kudos on that as well. Like you're running, I believe, with Merrill now, correct? But how long did it take you before you found your first sponsor? And, you've probably had several sponsors since then, but how long did it take you before you actually hit your first one and was like, okay, I can do this?
Yeah. So my first sponsor was sometime at the end of 2016, was a company Down to Run out of Florida, which they actually put on the Dunes 100 and all of that stuff. So they're my first sponsor. They reached out to me at the end of 2016, I guess it was, and they saw, and it was after Tunnel Hill, and it was actually end of 2015. So like literally less than a year after starting ultras, and they reached out and they remembered me from crewing and pacing a friend at Leadville 2014. And they were like, hey, we're going to kind of pay attention to you. And then just saw the results I had throughout that next year. So they reached out, wanted to support me a bit. So they helped with some travel, some race entries. And plus, I did quite a few of their races and just super awesome people. And so they honestly helped get my career off the ground. And then at the end of 2016, beginning of 2017, I signed with Innovate for 2 years, and through Innovate for shoes, Rabbit for clothing, and then through that whole partnership, I raced Western States in 2018, and it was funny because going into Western States, Trail Runner magazine wanted to do an article, and they're like, what's it like being Black and gay and a trail runner? And is like, hey, I've already done a podcast about this. Like, I actually just want to talk about the lack of sponsorship for athletes that live east of the Mississippi. And they're like, oh, we never thought of that. And so, like, I completely hijacked their article, spun it the way I wanted to talk about it, because I was like, I'm kind of just tired of talking about it. And so with that, when that article came out, the North Face was in my inbox literally the day the article came out. They're like, hey, we want to chat. I was just like, this must be spam. Like, the North Face doesn't want to talk to me. So I just deleted it and they didn't hear from me for a couple days. So once again, the athlete manager at the North Face reached back out and she's like, hey, this is real. And so I said, okay, like, if this is real, then please call me on this day at this time. Here's my phone number. And Maeve, the athlete manager at the time, like, she called me on that day at that time. She's like, hey, this is actually real, Corey. I was like, okay, then let's chat. Sorry, I'm here. And so that, so it's just really funny because like the North Face has never signed a runner that lives east of the Mississippi. Like, if you don't live in Boulder or Salt Lake or, the Bay Area, they weren't interested in you. But like the article that I was able to, get out there was like, hey, this is kind of a wake up call. So I was with the North Face from, the end of 2018 through this, what is 2024, I guess, the end of 2023. And then signed with Merrill and John G for 2024 and beyond, and quite a bit beyond. And had a great time with the North Face. Had a lot of awesome opportunities. Got to do some really, really awesome things, and it was just time to move on.
Well, that's awesome, man.
Yeah, and now with Merrill and John G, couldn't be happier.
Yeah, and that's awesome that I really admire the fact that you didn't let them control the article and that you did what you wanted to do, because you actually spun that article to your advantage. Yeah. And that's what it takes sometimes for people to open their eyes to see, like, yeah, we are missing something. There's something a little bit bigger than what we're really noticing. So that, man, that's awesome. I love the fact that you even thought to do that. Yeah. So that's just remarkable, and got respect for you for even bringing that up and doing that. So, and just taking control of the article yourself. So it worked for you.
Thanks.
So congratulations.
Yeah, thanks. It's like there had already been an article, there had already been a couple of podcasts at that time, and it was like the hot topic. And I'm like, cool, but there's so many other things I really wanted to talk about. And it's like every other thing was like, it has to be XYZ. And I'm like, no, like this is something we actually need to talk about, because it was one of those things where it's like I was finally getting, like, I was having the results that were good enough to be noticed, but I just didn't live in the right area to be able to pick up sponsorships, because, pictures of cornfields and pictures of mountains that are 4,000 feet high don't look as pretty as the big mountains out west. And like, no, but there are stories, there are people here. And I'm like, we need to be sponsoring athletes that live east of the Mississippi. And it's like, yeah, I had lived out west for a couple of years of my life, but I will always be an East Coaster, and I'm always going to be an East Coaster. And so because of that, I'm like, I still feel super passionate about it to this day.
Absolutely.
Where did you grow up?
I grew up in Illinois.
Okay.
And so, once again, east of the Mississippi.
Yep.
Yeah. Yeah, I didn't even bother to ask you that when we first started. I know we kind of jumped around and talked about different things, but didn't ask where you grew up. And then I got to ask you one more question before we turn it over to Matt for the listener questions.
Got him.
And this is the same question we ask everybody on this podcast. And it's, why do you run? What keeps you motivated? Like when you're sitting in a chair at mile 75 and you hate everything about running, why do you do it?
Yeah. Running is fun, is the easy answer. But honestly, I do it because I just want to know how it feels. I mean, that's the only way to experience something. Like, you have to do it for yourself to know how it feels. And like, it doesn't always feel good. It's not always super fun, but you always learn something from it. Always a different experience. Like, no two runs are ever the same. And at the end of the day, being able to explore somewhere on foot, like, you get to go places that most normal people will never get to go. Like, you will get to see things. Like, that's what, like, especially traveling, I love to just go for a run in a new place when I'm traveling, because there's so many times it's like, oh, like, you've been to, I don't know, we'll use just any random city, and it's like, oh, you have to go do this tourist thing and go do that tourist thing. It's like, oh, no, just let me put on my hydration pack, and I'm gonna do a 20-mile loop around the city, and I'm gonna go see all of these things that, like, most people will just never see. And so for me, like, I like having the ability to do that. And I think that's what keeps me motivated. And then racing is just something that I get to continue to do to be able to have these other experiences.
Yeah. Racing's almost like the celebration from the experiences, like you get to do all of that. And then the race is kind of like, okay, well, I put in the work. I'm going to kind of celebrate it on this race. And you kind of start over. But I love that, because regardless, like, it's funny, when Mary and I go on a vacation somewhere, and I remember the first vacation we kind of went on, she's like, you probably hate that we're running on vacation. I was trying to look at her and I'm like, do you know me? Like, this is vacation, like running, like, and you just get to explore the area, and you wouldn't get to see parts of the area if you didn't run it. And man, that is so much fun, because you're seeing something that other people don't see when you're in that area. And to your point, like, you're not ever going to experience that if you're not out there running and doing it. So it's just really cool. And it's a whole different perspective. I love that answer.
Yeah, thanks.
All right, Mr. Williams, I'm going to turn it over to you.
All right, we got a few questions, and some of them are about Chattanooga. So, because people around here know Chattanooga. What is your favorite thing about Chattanooga when you lived there?
Yeah, my favorite thing about living in Chattanooga was honestly just the access to the outdoors. I mean, you have everything from trail running right in town to you can get out onto the river, or, I mean, you can run from, the North Shore of Chattanooga to Lookout Mountain, do a loop on Lookout Mountain and back to the North Shore, and you can do a 50K. And I mean, there's a gas station that you could use as your 10-mile kind of aid station if you want. So you really don't even have to carry that much. So I honestly love the access to the outdoors.
I agree with that.
Yeah, and Chattanooga has so many trails they have developed around there. It's truly awesome. It really is just like an outdoor town now. It's really cool to see.
Well, a lot like you got the right at the outskirts of the city of Chattanooga. is right there at Lookout Mountain. So you can be there and then climb right up and then come right back.
Yeah.
So which is pretty cool. And like you said, it has became a very like a huge outdoor, little town. The next question is, what was your favorite race that you've ran in Chattanooga?
Ooh, favorite Chattanooga. It's not stump jump. It would be, yeah, stump jump has just beat me up too many times. Probably Stillhouse 100K, which is just slightly outside of Chat, but that's still my favorite race. Just because I love the midnight start to it, and it's one of the more remote races, and so I like that you can have something that challenging, but yet have it be very close to like Chat. Yeah, Stillhouse 100K is definitely my favorite Chattanooga area race.
And that's Bad Beard Events. Is that Jenny Kelly? Is that right? Is that who that
Sure
race
is.
Okay,
Yep.
that's what I thought. Looks like you came back to Chattanooga to run that race this year, or were you still in Chattanooga?
Yep, I came back for it this year. So I had a DNS there back in 2020, and then I've dropped out of it twice. So this is my fourth time signing up for it, and then ended up winning it and setting the course record this year. So sometimes it just takes 4 tries.
It was meant to be.
It
meant
was.
to happen like
It was.
I think, like when we did our New Year's run, Morgan was talking about that race. I hadn't really heard of it. And she was talking about how she was really wanting to go back and actually do the whole thing because she paced, I think, her sister-in-law. So that's cool.
Yeah, and Bad Beard Events, I mean, they put on a lot of races, and she's a really good race director. So definitely everything.
Oh, yeah.
I've not experienced one of her races yet. I want to, but I've only heard great things.
All right, moving on from Chattanooga area, let's move on to the East Coast. And what has been your favorite East Coast race?
Favorite East Coast race. Ragged Mountain 50K up in New Hampshire. That was my first introduction to East Coast racing, just that style of racing, and it absolutely kicked my butt. Like, it just destroyed me. And this was back in, I think, 2017, maybe 2018. It was. I knew that East Coast trails were technical, but I had never actually really been on them before. So then to go do this, and I'm like, oh yeah, I'm in shape, I'm fit, this is going to be really fun. And then I go, and this race just absolutely kicked my butt. And I think that was when I fell in love with East Coast racing.
Definitely much more technical.
Yeah, we've heard that from numerous.
I haven't ran that race either. I'm going to have to check that one out. Does that one still go on?
Oh yeah. So they have a standalone 50K, which is actually more like 55 to 58K. And then they have
that's how you measure races. So, I get it.
It's ish.
Sure.
It's ish.
Yep. And then they also have a 3-day stage race. So it's 75 miles over 3 days.
That's cool. Yeah. I'm going to check that out.
Yeah.
Yeah, that looks cool too.
The next question is, at an aid station, would you rather have sweet or a salty snack?
Oh boy. I mean, it really depends on how deep into the race we are, but honestly, you can't go wrong with boiled potatoes and salt, or mashed potatoes with chicken broth, something like that. So I guess probably more salty.
I'm glad you said that. That's one of my favorite foods that Matt just absolutely hates. But like at night, if I'm in a 100-mile race or I'm doing like a backyard ultra or something, chicken broth and mashed potatoes. That is where it's at. And I want it like soupy runny, like awful. Where I can just drink it and go back out on the course. That's the best stuff ever.
That is awful.
It's amazing.
He gave me that at one race. It didn't last long. It came right back up. It was no.
Well, I agree with you, Corey. That's where it's at. That's good stuff.
All right.
Matt prefers the bowl of M&Ms with hand lube.
I'd rather have a bowl of M&Ms with hand lube on it than mashed potatoes with chicken broth. If you could pick one aid station food, what would it be?
Yeah, honestly, it's gonna have to be some sort of potato something. Either that potato with salt or the mashed potatoes with chicken broth. I mean, if it could, I mean, if I could, or or there's a chocolate, no, a hazelnut and honey Uncrustable. And that might actually be one of my favorite things. I normally have those in my pack, so I guess I'm normally carrying those, and it's not an aid station food. But if it was, that would probably be it. I just discovered those before Grindstone, because normally it's, the strawberry or the grape Uncrustables. But there's a hazelnut chocolate with, like, honey, I guess, and it is amazing.
I've not seen this. I've
never saw this one.
I've got to try that.
Where'd you find that at?
They had them at Walmart.
Yep, I'm going to check it out.
I don't think our Walmart has them.
Well, we got plenty of Walmarts around here. I'm sure we can find one.
Yeah, probably Knoxville. Probably Knoxville. All right, my last question is, if you could race one race, what would it be as your dream race?
Good question.
I honestly don't know what it would be, just because I feel like I set up my schedule every year to just kind of do whatever sounds fun and exciting. And so yeah, I don't really know what my dream race would be right now. It's probably going to say something like Cocodona 250. We'll go with that. We'll go with that for now.
I mean, it's going to change as soon as you run that race. That's something that's always growing with you.
Always growing, always changing.
It's Cocodona for now.
Yeah, Cocodona for now. That would be a good one. I don't know. I mean, this is going to sound terrible, but it's not hard rock. Like, so many people, that's the dream race. But I mean, it's not that I'll keep running a qualifier and put my name in, and then once I get in, I'll be very happy to go. But that's not the dream. And same with UTMB. Like, UTMB is just so many people that that's not the dream. And I feel like my answers are always a little, like, off the beaten path of what the actual dream race is. But I don't know. Like, I enjoy going and doing things that are just different.
Yeah, I agree with that.
And I got one last question for you, Corey. Since you've got such a tenured experience in running and ultra running, and you basically grew up running, but there's probably a lot of people that listen to this that haven't really signed up for their first big 100-miler or their first big ultra. What advice would you give them to help them? Someone that's, only ran like marathon or a half marathon, they're scared to sign up for that first 50-miler or 100-miler. What advice would you give them to kind of help them?
Yeah, I'll actually keep it super simple. So the first thing I'd say is find something that sounds exciting and sign up for it. But then the second thing is, training doesn't have to be epic. It just needs to be consistent. Like, if you go on Strava and you look at what the pros are doing and what some people are doing, like, yeah, some of the training is going to be absolutely wild, absolutely epic. And it's like, oh man, like, how could I ever do that? You don't have to do all of that stuff to still complete a 50-miler. There are plenty of people that run 50-mile races and 100-mile races that are running, like 60-mile weeks. And, like, is that going to get you to the finish as fast as possible? No, but it can get you to the finish. So just be consistent. Like, honestly, get out, be consistent. A 30-minute run is better than no run for the day. And honestly, it's like just little things like that of getting out, being active, and just stay consistent, and you'll get to the finish.
I love it.
Yeah.
Great advice.
Yeah.
And you're exactly right. A 30-minute run is better than saying, I'm too busy, I can't run the 10 miles that's scheduled today.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just have to take life as it is. And if you've got a 20 or 30, 40-minute window, go do it, because that's way better than saying, I didn't have time to do it today.
Yep.
Absolutely. And I mean, that was even my goal last year. And honestly, it's still kind of one of my New Year's resolutions, goals, whatever, for this year. It's like, I'm on the road a lot. And so with that, I still like to remind myself, like, hey, just if you can get out for 30 minutes, like, say you have even if you have an hour on the schedule and you have a 30-minute window early in the day and you have a 30-minute window later in the day, great. Like, that's an hour of running. Like, just, you can break it up. It's okay to be flexible. Like, I guess that's another big thing. If you have a training plan that you're following or whatever, and you don't have time to get everything done that day or whatever, that's okay. Be flexible. You can move runs around. You can move workouts. You can move long runs. Like, I wouldn't make it a habit of moving these things around, but it is perfectly fine and acceptable to move things to a day that you might have a little bit more time if you're still willing to get something in on the day.
Yeah. Great advice.
Yep.
Thank you, Corey. Now,
Yeah,
do you
absolutely.
have any questions for us?
What's next for you guys?
Go ahead, Matt. I'll let you start.
Well, I got a 5K Sunday, and then the next weekend I've got a Mad Backyard. So,
The Chattanooga
race.
Yes.
Perfect.
So I've got Pistol 100 in March, and as soon as the foot gets healed, I've started running back over the last few weeks, so I'm back up to 1 hour runs a day as we're nursing this thing back. Pistol 100 in March, and then I've got bigger races. Yeti 50, Yeti 100, and No Business 100 are my bigger races this year. Just still wanting to race Yeti 100. That was like my big goal last year. So, got to do Yeti 50, hit my target, won it. Was wanting to go race Yeti 100 really hard, and then Hurricane Helene hit Virginia the day that we were there. We got evacuated. So go back and try it again this year. So I'm following the same routine. Oh, and I got Mid-State Mile. I forgot about that.
We got
Mid-State Mile. So how about you, Corey? That's a great question. What's next for you?
Yeah, so in a couple of weeks, I will be heading down to New Zealand for Tarawera. I'm going to do the 100-miler there and hoping to run a PR for 100 miles.
Is that why you moved to Maine, so you could get used to the snow?
Yeah. No, thankfully, I think, hopefully there will not be any snow in New Zealand this time because February should be decently warm. So, yeah, I'm hoping it'll be good weather and just a completely different experience of New Zealand.
What distance did you say it was?
100-miler.
Nice. Awesome. Well, we got to follow along on that one.
Yeah, it'll be fun. It's exciting.
Is it a mountaintop race or is it like a little flatter?
It's flatter. I think it's only maybe 12,000 feet of gain for the 100. So actually, I mean, it's very runnable, which is exciting and also kind of terrifying because once again, when it's runnable, that means you actually have to run. But 12,000 feet of gain is still enough that you'll feel it, but it's not but Western States is runnable, And so that's where it's like, all right, it's going to be less climbing than Western States, but more than Tunnel Hill.
Well, I have no doubt. I think you're probably going to do great.
So yeah, definitely.
We'll be following along, Corey. Any last questions for us?
I think that might be it.
Well, Corey, man, thank you so much for taking the time to be on the podcast, share your story. And thank you so much for sharing so much. Some of your, I love how as you're talking through your races, you can see how passionate you are about your races and the memories that you shared. They're very detailed. So it truly means it's very special to you. You can tell. And I love that. I love seeing you smile when you're talking about it and laugh. And, that's the joy in this sport that you get to see come out. So thank you for sharing that. And thank you for sharing your story.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me on. This is really fun and fun to look back on things and remember them and laugh and cry and all of it.
Well, thank you, Corey. And we wish you the best, man.